Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's third wave of the coronavirus continued to subside this week. New case numbers again today in the 500s as the authorities consider adjusting the level of distancing from this weekend. North Korea holds a military parade to mark the end of a congress of its ruling Workers' Party. It unveiled a new submarine-launched missile, but apparently did not bring out its ICBMs. And the South Korean government finalizes plans to add thousands more homes in the capital, Seoul, to address the shortage, with many to be leased out at subsidized rates. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea's third wave of the coronavirus continued to subside this week. New case numbers again today in the 500s. This weekend, the government is planning to announce changes to the current distancing measures, which could see some of them eased. There could also be special measures taken for the Lunar New Year holiday next month. Han Sung-woo reports.
South Korea reported 513 new COVID-19 cases on Friday. The fourth day in a row, the figure has stayed in the 500s. 484 of the new infections were locally transmitted, with Seoul and the surrounding area accounting for more than 320 of them. Cluster infections at nursing homes and religious gatherings continue to add to the nation's total tally, now at over 71,000. So far, over 700 cases are being linked to the outbreak at the BTJ Center for All Nations, a missionary facility in Gyeongsangbuk-do province. Recent daily figures have been stable, though, and officials are mulling over what changes can be made on the current social distancing guidelines.
We understand that public health and the livelihoods of many families are on the line, so we will do our best to make the wisest possible decision.
The changes, which will come into effect next Monday, are to be announced on Saturday, along with special rules for the upcoming Lunar New Year holidays. But many of the current prevention measures, including the ban on gatherings of 5 or more people, are expected to be kept in place. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun also warned against groundless gossip surrounding the safety and purpose of vaccinations to begin in the country next month. Meanwhile, recent research conducted by health authorities on 40 adults found that those who recover from COVID-19 can later experience after effects, including hair loss, shortness of breath, and in some cases, even decreased lung function. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
A new law takes effect tomorrow specifying the help South Korean nationals can get from the South Korean government if they find themselves in legal trouble or other emergencies overseas. The law says that local consulates and embassies will provide people in need with a list of lawyers and/or interpreters. In case of disaster, if necessary, the government will dispatch an emergency response team. The law also stipulates what South Korean nationals must do themselves when overseas to secure their own safety. For the details, visit the websites of the National Law Information Center or South Korea's Foreign Ministry. North Korea, as widely expected, has ended the Congress of its ruling Workers' Party with a military parade. It used the occasion to reveal a new type of submarine-launched ballistic missile, but unlike the last parade, it did not publish pictures of its ICBMs. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Fighter jets flying in formation during a military parade Thursday evening attended by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square. The event was held to mark the end of the 8-day Workers' Party Congress. Going by images released on Friday by the North state-run Korean Central News Agency, the regime showcased its state-of-the-art weaponry, including a new type of submarine-launched ballistic missile, which it presumably labels the Bukgusong 5. The report called it the world's most powerful weapon that will overpower the world with our strengthened military technology and underwater strategy. Other weapons seen rolling through the streets were modified versions of Russia's Iskander-class short-range ballistic missiles, one of the North's so-called strategic weapons that the regime claims can invade South Korea's missile defense systems. But unlike the North's last military parade 3 months ago, North Korea did not release images of intercontinental ballistic missiles, which could be aimed at sending Washington a message about a strong military might as denuclearization talks remain in limbo. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says it's analyzing the military hardware displayed during the parade. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's central bank decided on Friday to keep its benchmark interest rate at an all-time low of 0.5%. The decision comes as the BOK focuses on what some say is an overheated stock market rally and a boom in household debt. The governor of the central bank said he's concerned about individual investors taking on unbearable risk. Other major central banks are holding steady as well, the U.S. Federal Reserve having signaled that it'll keep rates near zero at least until 2023. The latest data on the economy show how the pandemic continues to hamper the South Korean economy. The latest GREENBOok report from the finance ministry shows that in November, retail sales were down on month by 0.9% as people did less shopping in the stores. That was before South Korea's third wave began in earnest. And as for jobs, the number of people employed in December was down from a year earlier, before the start of the pandemic, by 628,000. That's the biggest decline since 1999 in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. The hardest hit sector by far was services. The ministry says it's still expecting an economic recovery as countries roll out COVID-19 vaccines. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Untitled Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon and thanks for coming on.
Good afternoon.
Well, stocks on Wall Street started out higher in Thursday's session but closed lower in the end. Investors looking at the Biden administration's pandemic relief plans and other spending. Stocks in Korea today sharply lower. What's the story in the markets?
Yes, if you look at the Dow Jones, it was quite strongly up at the beginning of the day and then traded lower and closed lower. It lost about 0.2%. S&P, same thing, about losing 0.4%, and Nasdaq lost about 0.1%. However, though, the boosting measure would have benefited the small and mid-cap companies, so Russell 2000 was up close to 2%. As far as Korea is concerned, there's continuation of net selling happening between the institutional investors as well as foreign investors, where the net buyer continues to be the retail investors purchasing about 2.1 trillion won, and the institutional investors continue to sell about 1.4 trillion won. In terms of the overall, the sentiment-wise, it seems to be quite mixed because Donald Trump impeachment process is still happening, while that coming president Biden has announced the new package to support the businesses and household. And the detail of that is it's called American Rescue Plan, which includes 1,400 checks for most Americans and temporarily boost the unemployment benefits and a rise in a federal minimum wage to $15 per hour. So all that would have positive implications for the small and mid-cap companies, and that's the reason why the small cap and mid-caps were doing quite well yesterday. As far as Korea is concerned, I think this is just a tug of war between retail investors versus the institutional investors. Institutional investors are continuing to lose their money, and therefore they can only sell, while the retail investors continue to purchase on their own, and the customer deposit remains to be above 70 trillion won, and we expect that numbers to continue to go up in the future.
Well, you mentioned the stimulus in the U.S. proposing massive increases in spending. Oil prices on that news continuing to rise. Oil's come up quite a bit in the new year, now at an 11-month high. Tell us about that move and your outlook.
Sure. If you look at the overall oil movement, it's all related to the economic boosting measures, and that would have positive implications for the domestic consumption and the economic growth rate of the U.S., and that does benefit the oil price movement. However, though, we've been saying that oil price rise tends to be directed by the U.S. dollar depreciation. However, into the future, we don't see the depreciation to be that aggressive given the fact the economy is recovering. And if that's the case, the oil price would have probably limited upside potential in the future. On top of that, if you look at the electric car movement, as well as the shale gas production, which added quite significantly overall, which means that the supply and demand side would not be in favor of oil dollar keep rising above the $55 range. Right now it's at around 53. We think that the oil price will remain to be range bound between $45 to $55 in the future.
And the Bank of Korea decided to leave its policy rate where it is at 0.5%, a record low. It's been at that level since the middle of last year. What do you make of the situation, Mr. Yu?
Yes, if you look at the South Korea, foreign investors and the capital inflow seems to be still quite steady, despite that the Korean won have appreciated so much. And because of that, if you look at the overall liquidity condition, it remains to be quite steady. And if you look at the inflation pressure for Korea, it seems to be quite reasonably low. And the consumer price index were rising only by 0.5%. Core inflation, however, though it's going up, but it still remains to be well below 1%. So all being said, that the Bank of Korea would remain to be quite ample in terms of liquidity injection. If you look at the M1 growth rate, it remains to be well above 26% year on year. And the M2 growth rate remains to be about 9.7%. All in all, we don't think that the BOK will move any direction in terms of the liquidity injections or the interest rate side. We do expect that kind of 0.5% interest rate environment to remain where it is as long as U.S. keep their interest rate at zero range.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today. As always, have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. You too.
And to boost the supply of housing in the densely populated Korean capital, several areas of Seoul will be permitted to build new high-rise apartments with thousands more units. Some of these will be made available for lease as public housing at subsidized rates. Kim Sang-min has the details.
South Korea is seeking to provide more public housing in Seoul through its public urban redevelopment plan. That's according to Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi on Friday, who explained the government's latest plan to stabilize the overheated housing prices and alleviate housing shortages. As a part of this project, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and Seoul City have finalized the 8 proposed public urban redevelopment sites within Seoul. Those areas had already been designated as urban redevelopment districts many years ago, but were put on hold due to various issues, including poor conditions for sales or conflict within the redevelopment associations. The latest plans will ease construction rules in those areas to accelerate the resumption of redevelopment. Currently, most of the sites are filled with low-rise housing areas due to limited floor area ratio rules. With the new plan, the ratio will be increased by up to 120% at those sites, allowing taller apartment blocks to be built. Following this plan, 3,000 more homes than the original plans are expected to be built on the sites, bringing the total to some 4,700 homes. Public institutions like Korea Land and Housing Corporation will oversee the project so that some of the housing can be distributed in the form of public units. 20 to 50% of the increased floor area ratio will have to be donated for rental housing. In addition to the latest plan, the government is seeking extra measures to further increase the supply of housing in the capital. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
For the past month, COVID-19 has continued to spread through small-scale gatherings. The Ministry of Health and Welfare has decided to extend the special measures for the end of the year, along with the level 2.5 social distancing for an additional 2 weeks until January 17th. The ban on private gatherings of 5 people or more is expanded nationwide and will be implemented for 2 weeks.